Vampires and werewolves used to be scary lead characters in Halloween tales, not heartthrobs in love stories that make teenage girls everywhere pine for interspecies romance. It has been 13 years since Twilight sparkled its way into the pop culture conversation in 2005. However, the franchise didn't really blow up, nor did the discourse around it start to turn into why it was the worst thing that ever happened to Western civilization, until around 2008. You Beautiful. The discourse around Twilight went from teenagers in Twimums liking a thing get Edward out of the way. Twilight mums come, we have our own Twilight moms here, to the rest of the internet deciding that the popularity of Twilight was the last herald of the end times in about 5 minutes. But as a 22-year-old way too into Transformers college grad with a night job working for the Nielsen Company, I didn't really have it in me to give a shit about this particular culture war, except for this one thing that really rubbed me the wrong way about Stephenie Meyer. It came from an article on Cracked.com by forum contributor Okami Spirit on August 19, 2009, alleging all sorts of things about Meyer, not just as an author, but as a person that someone who doesn't like Twilight would obviously take as gospel, describing Meyer as a self-obsessed, narcissistic, hypocritical, and infantile woman. Most egregious, according to Okami Spirit, was Stephenie using her brother, Seth, as a shield for criticism. He runs her site and also comes off as arrogant. He does not allow any emails to reach his sister that say anything short of the article goes on to excoriate Meyer and her brother Seth for filtering Meyer's fan mail, particularly his decision not to forward a particularly entitled missive, demanding an explanation for certain creative decisions Meyer took in Breaking Dawn. Okami Spirit then paints Seth as completely unreasonable for declining to forward this letter to Stephenie, and then explaining why he declined to do so to this aggrieved group of fans. And here's the thing. At the time, I actually sided with the fans. If you err in the public eye, and you are not able to consider and respond to every ounce of criticism that is thrown your way, valid or not, then you don to deserve to be there, right? After all, the discourse around Twilight in 2008 and 2009 was totally reasonable, right? Well, it's been 10 years, and with a hopefully more mature hindsight, I feel like there isn't really much of a conversation in the discourse re-examining not only how we treated Twilight, but how we treated Meyer herself. And with Meyer, well, So, I guess I'll be the one to get this ball rolling. Dear Stephenie Meyer, I am sorry. Twilight is a 2005 paranormal romance novel about a teenage girl who moves to a new town and immediately falls in love with a hot, sad boy who turns out to be a vampire. He is obsessed with her, and he wants to love her forever, and she's super into it. This goes on for 4 books, and there's also a love triangle with a cute werewolf. I didn't read Twilight until 2013 when we were developing the Twilight parody Awoken for our book-themed show, Booze Your Own Adventure. So even in writing this episode, I have rediscovered the fact that I was apparently one of those shit garbage people who rated Twilight 1 star back in 2009, despite having not even read it. I gave it 2 stars after I actually did read it, though in hindsight, I'd probably be a little more charitable, because even in 2013, I was mindlessly going along with the groupthink narrative that Twilight was a blight upon literacy. But I am going to admit here and now, and I want you to bear with me, Twilight, it isn't that bad. I know, here's it. I'm not saying it should have won the Booker Prize or anything, and it might be because I had Twilight as a chaser for books like Cinder and Divergent, which I genuinely thought were way worse, but Twilight reads like perfectly passable commercial fiction. It is emotion-driven rather than prose or plot-driven, but that's true of a lot of contemporary young adult fiction, and especially of romance novels. I wasn't going to go recommending it to anyone, but I didn't have any problem getting through it, unlike certain derivatives. When I say commercial fiction by design, it has to have a lower barrier of entry because more people are reading it, and yeah, fiction even more so because its target audience is 14-year-olds. Whether or not a book is marketed as commercial fiction has more to do with marketability than of quality, which itself is somewhat subjective. That said, in recent days, other works of commercial fiction are being re-examined for perhaps being not good. Dan Brown is fascinated with puzzles and logic, and that's what made him famous, but calling his characters even two-dimensional would be charitable, and his prose is bad to the point of parody. Same for Ready Player One, premised solely on the idea that there is a meaningful reward in life for tying one's personal identity to the mindless consumption and regurgitation of pop culture artifacts. Also, it's bad. Fincher, Kubrick, Lucas, Spielberg, Del Toro, Tarantino, and of course, Kevin Smith. I studied Monty Python, and not just Holy Grail either. Everyone became calling them the Sixers. These days, most Gunters refer to them as the Suxers because they sucked. She leaned over and kissed me. It felt just like all those songs and poems had promised it would. It felt wonderful, like being struck by lightning. I am not saying that Twilight deserves to be reevaluated because it was secretly good the whole time, but rather that the level of virulent bile that came to define it and Meyer herself was actually not in proportion to Twilight's badness, or anything Stephenie Meyer herself did. Melissa Rosenberg, who wrote the screenplay for Twilight, said in a 2012 interview with IndieWire, when you start to read the criticism of Twilight, it's just vitriol. It's intense, the contempt, from critics, both men and women. We've seen more than our fair share of bad action movies. Bad movies geared towards men or 13-year-old boys. And you know, the reviews are like, "Ugh, it was crappy, but it was a fun ride." But no one says, "Oh my God, if you go see this movie you're a complete thing idiot." And that's the tone with which people attack Twilight. The backlash around Twilight that began in the late aughts came on 3 main fronts. 1. Bad prose and story structure problems. Namely, that there is no plot up until the last 50 pages of the book. Nothing's gonna happen. There's 7 of us, and there's 2 of them. This is the most difficult to dispute. The first two-thirds of the book are just Edward and Bella mooning over each other, and then all of a sudden a bad guy shows up, and he wants to eat her. But then they kill him, and then that's that. And then that's they. Two, pure baseline, thinly veiled misogyny that looks down on everything marketed towards teenage girls. And as long as I'm committing heresy, I know I may get blowback for stating what is kind of the obvious to everyone of all stripes, but we, and by we, I mean our culture, we kind of hate teenage girls. Who? We hate their music. We hate their insipid backstabbing. We hate their vanity. We hate their selfie sticks. We hate their makeup. We hate their stupid books and the stupid sexy actors they made famous and their stupid sparkly vampires. Hey girls, let's go get ready to look so good. Word, word, word. And then we wonder why so many girls are eager to distance themselves from being the object of societal contempt. Are most girls more interested in the pretty maidens from the songs? John flowers in her hair. Most girls are idiots. Hell, there's a reason why in 1999 it went hard on the new metal while openly broadcasting me disdain for the boy bands that other, lesser, more woman-y girls voted for on Churl. Now we know we all be loving this right here. Liam Hop. Biscuit is right here. Phew, boy did I bet on the wrong horse. 'Cause if you don't care, then we don't care. Again, according to Melissa Rosenberg, it's also because it's a female it's worthy of contempt. Because it feels female. It is less than. So it wasn't just that Twilight was popular. It's who Twilight was popular with. Teenage girls. And the mothers of teenage girls. And the vast majority of the virulent hatred towards Twilight didn't really come from grown men, but from other girls and women who were more than eager to distance themselves from something so unapologetically female. And as an aside, not only do I think we done wrong by Stephenie Meyer, we done wrong by teenage girls too. Like, being a teenager is hard enough, but there's something damaging about being made to feel shame because you relate more to Bella than some other feminist-approved strong female character who don't need no man to rescue her. And I'm not saying that trope doesn't have toxic elements or warrant a discussion, but I also don't think it speaks to some character deficit if your fantasy is being rescued by a sparkly vampire prince. Yes, being saved from implied gang rape is lazy and cliché writing, but it's also popular for a reason. And you're not stupid if that's your fantasy. I described three fronts when, really, these are often interconnected. That yes, your pop feminist hot takes can have elements of internalized misogyny, namely, the visceral aversion to a thing that women and teenage girls like while giving a pass to or ignoring altogether other equally high-profile media of the day. Hey, hey, Bumblebee, stop lubricating the bags. That has the moral benefit of not needing to provide a strong role models for teenage girls. So I think that they read both really good people, but I still think you should be using fictional characters as role models. Which leads me to the third front of attack, and what has become the most popular, that which focuses on the problematic elements of the story. Bella is 17, and Edward is over 100. He saves her from attempted gang rape by randos, which is lame and fanficky, but I totally wrote that fanfic when I was 16, so stones, glass houses. Bella is annoyed by her perfectly loving family. Bella has no interests outside of her vampire boyfriend. Out, her valentine, there's this. I like watching you sleep. But Twilight is far from unique in any of those regards. Sometimes I'll see some other piece of media that hits some of the same beats as the original Twilight novel, spark little or no outrage or even discussion. What room are you in? What room you yeah. I'm not telling you that. I see you were in room 625. Room 625, thank you. Unless that person is because I'm the only person left in the world who cares about family. Buffy the Vampire Slayer has the ancient vampire hooking up with a minor, but you rarely see that treated with anything resembling the moral outrage over Twilight doing the same. The Game of Thrones books have much more age difference dynamics than in the show. Daenerys is 14 when she gets pregnant, and yet the sex with her older husband called Drogo is way more consensual than in the show. Martin meant this to be a reflection of how young people in medieval Europe, the time period on which A Song of Ice and Fire is based, got married. But you see more pushback against the TT series for taking what are in the book consensual acts and turning them non-consensual, while kind of ignoring the fact that, in this day and age, it is generally agreed upon that 13-year-olds, even 13-year-olds in 1463, can't consent to sex with a grown-ass man. More recently, there's the And I'm the Ancient Magus Bride, which hits a lot of the same beats that people take issue with in Twilight, but, more. The protagonist is 15 instead of 17, sells herself into slavery, and is then bought by this guy, who is considerably more than 100. He creates a situation in which she is utterly dependent on him. This happens. Oh yeah, and he also kind of wants to eat her. That's there. Oh, and also this. Well then. And yes, we could talk about different cultural standards and what constitutes a yikes in what country, in what context, and when teenagers can even consent, but, that's its own rabbit hole, and I'm gonna not. Their relationship isn't overtly sexual, but it wouldn't necessarily call it asexual either. It exists in this sort of non-committal middle ground, like Twilight did. And the not quite sexual nature speaks to the appeal of both when you read a teenage girl who is still in the process of figuring out her sexuality. The general response as to why the above examples are acceptable where Twilight is not is that they contain appropriate levels of deconstruction. Which argues, sure. Magus Bride and Buffy are much more consciously deconstructive about the tropes they utilize. But it's not like Twilight is completely without internal examination. That's Edward Cullen. He's totally gorgeous, obviously. But apparently nobody here is good enough for him. Like I care, There are quotes in Twilight that are often taken out of context, like, "Do I dazzle you?" which brings to mind a sparkly Fabio, but in the book is actually kind of more played as like a cutesy joke. Maybe not a good joke, but Twilight is not completely lacking in self-awareness as it is so often assumed to be. Yes, Jacob imprinting on an infant is creepy, and the in-universe explanation is but it's not like that creepiness goes unremarked upon in the text. I'm not saying that all criticism of Twilight was disingenuous, but after a while its problematic argument starts to feel like a lazy excuse to hate on a popular thing teenage girls liked rather than good faith criticism. When I see the bile that was generated because a mother of 3 started to write a wish fulfillment young adult novel about a cute, sparkly vampire, and was then expected both by her fans and her detractors to personally bear the burden of every angry brain fart some half-educated internet randos had about when her book series unexpectedly sold 120 million copies. It's like, okay, come on. Imagine getting this constant deluge of feedback, be it either you change me life for the better, and I'm building a shrine to you in my hometown of Oshkosh, Nebraska, and I will kill myself if you don't come see it by this weekend, or you are the antefeminate Antichrist, and I hope you burn in hell. Hundreds, maybe even thousands of messages every day, and then being vilified for not bowing to every possible criticism. Why was Stephenie Meyer so loathed? She didn't do anything. She wrote a wish-fulfillment book. It's not great, but it is far from the worst of its genre. And yeah, it is goofy and parodying it is fun. And I'm also not saying I'm sorry for Awoken, which I am still pretty fond of and I don't consider a mean-spirited parody, or for our fakio author Sarah Elinsen, who was so much a critic of Stephenie Meyer, but of the type of thin-skinned yo author who started fights with people who leave bad reviews on Goodreads, which Meyer was. We mew with sipu with use with why with so view so 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 fair view where you view where you view you where to view where well, you well, considering just how much Lindsay James infringed on Meyer's copyright, outright stole her ideas, imagining if Stephenie Meyer was the vindictive narcissist that the 2009 Internet made her out to be, and actually had gone after E.L. James for what basically amounts to copyright infringement. Editors like, what if she had been like an Anna Rice type, and the whole 50 Shades debacle ended up getting litigated in court? That probably would have ended up with the legality of fanfiction in general getting litigated. And nobody wants that. So Meyer had to take the high road. And it's fine. She's fine. It's fine. She's, you know, she's fine. This is fine. 50 Shades of Grey. It's fine. It's fine. She's fine. It's fine. This is fine. It's fine. I don't make love. Yes, Twilight is silly. You better hold on tight. Spider Monkey. A lot of pop culture is silly. Imagine the same level of vitriol being leveled equally silly fast in the Furious franchise. Both franchises are dumb cheese, but they are dumb cheese targeting different markets. So why is one dumb cheese the object of so much pure cloching over hoops, a good role model for teenage girls, and the other, you know it's fine. Everyone, this is yours. The backlash to Twilight just was in proportion to what it or its author had done wrong. And I think by now a lot of us have forgotten just how bad it got. Stephenie Meyer just kind of dared to live her bliss in that Tommy Wiseau kind of way that's just a little too personal, a little too revealing. Especially when she says it was based on her dream, and it's like, oh, I had this dream about this really sexy guy, and she just writes this book about it. And like some things about Edward are so specific, and it's like, I was just convinced that, it's like, this woman is mad. She's completely mad, and she's in love with her own fictional creation. But said bliss ended up blowing up into a huge success. She couldn't just be a normal Mormon mom who made it big. There had to be a narrative about Stephenie Meyer, bad person, who wrote a deeply problematic book, and her fans are too stupid to realize what a bad person she is. Honestly, that Stephenie Meyer has gone into that long post-Twilight goodnight without so much as a well-deserved and hearty few to James, and the garbage entitled portion of her fan base is downright gracious, and says more about her than any of the mean and downright misogynist projection the world at large did. How does it make you feel that E.L. James took something that you sort of created and used it as inspiration for something that's pretty raunchy and that made her a lot of money? I'm glad that she is doing well and succeeding, and that's cool. The raunchy part, I wish that was attached to Twilight, just because I don't like to think of it that way, but you know it doesn't hurt Twilight. Twilight is its own thing, and it's separate, and it's fine. So, Twilight fans, you know your franchise is not beyond reproach, but should not be made to feel shame for what is ultimately just cheesy romance with sparkly vampires. And, Stephenie Meyer, I'm not saying you re some underappreciated genius, but you did not deserve the haranguing and entitlement and hatred that was lobbed at you and forever buoying into it. For that I am sorry. Okay, this is pedophilia advocacy for Lindsay. Take one.